I'm Ashley,
And I'm Jasmine.
and you're tuned into Ham Radio Stranger Things podcast.
It's a ham radio.
The Cadillac of ham radios.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Ham Radio as Stranger Things podcast. We've got a great episode for you today, as usual. But first, we have a little housekeeping to take care of, and I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine to let you know where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. You can find us on Instagram at Ham Radio Media, all one word, on Twitter at HamThrough, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media, or using our handle HamRadio1983. We also have a Discord you can join, which is linked in the description of this episode. If you have a fan theory or question you want to share, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley also has a fanfic on AO3 entitled Stranger Things College, which is also linked in the description. The podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and much more. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We have a lot of totally tubular stuff coming up, so be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content. Yeah, and also, I like season 3. I don't want to say my only issue, my big issue, if you take out, how the Russia plot, in terms of, when you actually see the Russians in that season, the Russians in that season are ridiculous. They are cartoonishly stupid. And so if they made them realistic, you know what I mean? Even if they'd made a slight change, when the Russians got down there and they realized, oh, these are a bunch of kids that work at the mall. Even if they made it be okay, well, and them trying to figure out, how we're going to dispose of these kids or what we're going to do. Because, they've seen us, but someone's going to notice if they go missing. Even if they'd had it be okay, they're having a conversation about this and others, sneak out, right? Something even just a little bit like that to kind of ground it more in reality. The rest of the season I enjoyed, or even just the characterization. Other people have commented on this, that the characterization for some characters is really off. Compared to what we'd gotten the past couple of seasons, although not nearly as far as season 4 for some characters. But I also enjoyed season 3. Again, there were things about it that took me out of the moment because I just felt like they were so unrealistic or they're just out of character.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point that just made me think of this. But the season 4 equivalent to the season 3 Russians is Sullivan in the military.
Yeah,
that's
I also hated that plot.
Why, because well, it's Colonel Sullivan, you're a man, not trained very well in special ops, because if it were me, I would have been like, hey, maybe we should tail behind that pizza van and see where that takes us, because it seems like these guys, these young men who are in this house, probably know this girl, so let's follow them. And they didn't do that, which is
weird, because when we hear the radio,
was very weird.
The radio communications are oh, there's a bogey, and they're oh, ignore the bogey. They're acting like this is a residential area and it's just a random pizza van instead of the middle of the Nevada desert. A pizza van is not just driving from California, by the way. It's Surfer Boy Pizza. It's Nevada. There's no surfing in Nevada. It's clearly a California pizza van driving towards the target. Common sense should tell you it's not a random pizza van. They're clearly there to get her. And then she gets in the van and they just let them get away. And again, it's a bright yellow pizza van. It makes it all the way to Indiana. It's
I
just
know, and
they're so dumb. They're so stupid.
I know they I just felt and I think too, on the flip side of that, is relates to, Mike, Jonathan, Will, um, Argyle, that side of the California plot, um, to me, that would have only made, that part much more interesting if we knew, like, these guys are in real danger because the military, Sullivan is after them, they might, try to kill them or something in the process, but, because, Sullivan never sent his men to chase down the pizza van with the boys in it, you never felt that at all. Like, you knew as soon as they left, and as soon as um, the dying agent gave them that pen and they figured out, what Nina was and stuff, like, you knew, like, they're going to make it out there to where 11 is safe and sound, and they're going to pick her up and they're going to go home and nothing's going to happen. And I really hated that part of it, I really wish there was more, like, oh my gosh, these kids really are in true danger. But we never got that, and I felt like that was a big, you know, missing piece from it, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it could have been interesting if they had the van followed, but then they like felt like at some point, they're able to lose the van, right? So then like they could still do the whole thing at the pizzeria. Because let's say, they know they're being followed, they manage to shake them, and then we as the audience know that they're still being followed, though. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and that's what kind of made it kind of boring to me, to be honest with you, because
yeah,
it
yeah.
was just like by that point you knew, okay, this is just a plot device to go rescue 11, which I mean is fine, but like, come on, like, that girl has about as much plot armor as you could possibly get. Like, nothing is gonna, happen to her, at least at that point. Um,
Yeah, and
and
it also makes me wonder what the point of the pizzeria stuff was, because we now know that the whole speech between the conversation between Jonathan and Will, right? Where Jonathan clocks what's going on, they have that heart to heart. That was Charlie Hatton's suggestion while filming. That wasn't in the original script. So in the original script, they don't follow the pizza van. Those guys get all the way to that pizzeria, and then they literally have the short scene with, Argyle, uh, Mike, and Elle, and then Elle goes into the sensory deprivation like bath. That's like obviously, getting into Vecna's mind, Max, obviously, but like, do you know what I mean? Like without that scene between Jonathan and Will, it's like, like they needed to be there to, so she could enter, but like apart from that, like they wouldn't even been in that pizzeria that long. Like all those interactions that surround it don't happen. So in the original script, like they don't follow the van, they pop into Vecna's mind, and then they zoop all the way to Indiana. Like that's the whole plot. Like that other stuff is only there because Charlie Hatton was like, maybe he should say something to Will. Like that,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Like
I do agree with that because, like, especially when you have Jonathan looking up in the rearview mirror and he knows, Will is obviously upset and is crying. And yeah, I do agree that is a good follow up, to do that, for him to, tell his brother, like, hey man, like, you know, it's okay. Like, I'm here for you because
yeah,
you're my brother and I love
exactly.
you, you know?
Yeah.
And, especially like for a character like Will, um, who I feel like, um, definitely needs reassurance at times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought it was great. It was a very, very touching moment, between the two of them. So good on Charlie Heaton for
Yeah,
making
I
that
will say,
suggestion.
yeah, because from what I've read, he had that suggestion, and then he had him kissing Nancy on the forehead at, at the end of the season. Like in the original script, he just hugs her. That's it. He hasn't seen his girlfriend in months, and that's it. Like I get that they're trying to drive the point home that they're donezo. I get that, but like even as somebody who's not, I'm not on board for Jancy at this point, but even then, the fact that he wouldn't be physically affectionate with her at all, apart from a hug, which you can give to anybody. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it felt like a bit heavy-handed. Like in the original script, Jonathan is 100% useless. Like he does nothing of significance. The only reason Jonathan does anything of significance in season 4 by talking to Will and actually like embracing Nancy is because Charlie Heaton said something during filming and they added it in. So like, do you know what I mean? Like that confuses me because I'm like, I'm not his biggest fan. We all know this. But if you're gonna have the character there and you're gonna have him be alive, right? And you're gonna try and claim he's a main character and he's part of the plot, you can't have a whole season where he does absolutely nothing. Like the actors should not have to say something. They should not be like, they shouldn't have to speak up and be like, you know, think he should maybe do something instead of just standing here all season. Like
Yeah.
that's you know what I mean?
I know, and it's like you remember, like I think it was an episode, it was in episode 4 when Owen's people are at the buyer's house and are filling them in what's going on. Originally they were just going to go back to Hawkins because they were like, worried about people back home, and they're like, we need to go help them. And I honestly, with what they did with them for the rest of the season, I really honestly would have rather have seen them do that, um, than just to go be, Eleven's Uber ride. That's some people don't agree with that, but I feel like that would probably been a lot more entertaining because you could have them make stops along the way, and again, like you could have just added like much more suspense, and maybe you could have, maybe they stop at a gas station to fill up gas, and Will and Jonathan can have a heart to heart, and maybe have Jonathan, open more up more about, kind of why he's, kind of been in this, funk he's been in, because really, and Charlie Heaton has also said this, like, Jonathan in season 4, he was depressed, you know, and I just feel like, um, the way that they, had it written or, played out, like a lot of people don't realize that, that's why Jonathan was, in the way he was, because he's depressed. And I just think that, little things like that, little changes probably could have, you know, made things a little bit better. But sorry to get on that very, very long, long rabbit trail.
Getting back to the bonus
Uh,
content.
yeah, but
Yeah,
look,
I agree.
there's still, so much about season 4 that still irks me, and it probably won't go away until I see season 5, and even then it
Yeah.
probably will still be there because I'm just like, especially, with the people that say, "Oh, season 4 is the best," and all that, and it's good. Don't get me wrong; it really is good. I think the cinematic quality is probably the best part about it, in addition to the the Hawkins plot. But um, there was just so many times where what I felt were missed opportunities, plot wise, where they absolutely could have done things a little bit differently, but they chose, made a creative decision to not do them or do what, they did. And that's where in some areas it just falls a little flat for me, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's times where even just a little bit of extra dialogue would have been helpful. Like I'm all for show don't tell, but take Jonathan for example. I thought in volume 2 you're going to get more of an explanation because I've seen people. To me, the whole plot just came out of left field, right? I didn't vibe with it, and I'm not the only one. But I did see a lot of people after the season came out say that they really resonated with Jonathan's story because to them it felt like a really great depiction of depression. Of a lot of people think about depression as sadness, right? As not being able to get out of bed. But there's also this other side to it that's not everyone's story of not of being like semi-functional and just the way we see it with Jonathan. And so, I do take that point. I'm really glad it resonated with people. And I think if they just included, like you said, like let's say they'd stopped at a gas station or even in that conversation with Will at the pizzeria, maybe Jonathan, instead of just saying like, yeah, like I'm like apologizing for being high all the time, if he'd instead of just saying like, no, I've been dealing with my own shit, like instead of saying that, if he'd kind of elaborated a little bit more on why he's been feeling this way, like what triggered it, what set off the depression, where he's coming from, even just a few extra lines of dialogue, I think would have really helped. Because like, well, in real life, sometimes this stuff just doesn't have a reason. These are characters. You know what I mean? We have to understand where they're coming from, you know. And we know that up until October, or no, actually November, actually, from the pictures we see, Jonathan in those photos looks like the character we've known for 3 seasons. So some point between like December and March, something happened. And Elle's also struggling quite a bit. So we know something happened in that time period, but we don't know what set them off, right? Like we don't know what was the like what triggered them, what kind of set the stuff in motion. We don't know where they're coming from, really. So even just a few extra lines of dialogue to kind of clue the audience in of, okay, we know how he's feeling, but why is he feeling this way? I think would have been really helpful.
Yes, exactly. Because like we kind of already know about 11, so she's been obviously been bullied for several months at that point. But like with Jonathan, we get like absolutely nothing other than maybe it's implied like because he started hanging out with Argyle, you know. But even then, it's like gonna need a little bit more, some more
Yeah,
than that.
because
But
they established Argyle isn't a bad influence on him. Like he's telling him not to lie. He's like he's like, you're stressing me out about your girlfriend. Like he's clearly, I think Argyle's an influence, but the weird thing is they made it clear in episode 1 that like he's trying to help Jonathan. He's not trying to take the guy down. He's trying to help in his own weird way. So like that to me, I was also like, okay, but if this guy's trying to help him, clearly he's not the he's a part of it, but he's not the trigger necessarily. So what was it? Like what set him careening off the rails, you know?
yeah, and one of the more what makes that only more unbelievable is the fact that Joyce Byers has no idea that her son is smoking pot in her house. I mean, come
Right? Because
on,
you can
like
smell it. She grew up
I
in the
know,
70s. Like you can smell like the fact that like at one point they entered Jonathan's room to like to put the tape in. And apparently she smells that is to me one of the most unrealistic parts of season 4, actually. The fact that nobody sniffs the air at any point. Because you know what I'm talking about. When you're around
yeah,
somebody who smells of weed or smells of anything, actually, we all do that thing where you kind of put your nose up and you go, like you sniff
yeah,
the air and you go,
yeah,
what the F's that? Or you go, ugh.
and
We all do
11
it.
11 even writes in her letter to Mike that Jonathan's been smoking smelly plants, so like even she's aware,
Yes.
like
Yes, even
that,
she's aware. Like they've had to talk. He had to talk to her about it, and I get
and it's
that.
like
Yeah,
the fact that both of those incidences in particular come in episodes 1 and 2, which the Duffer Brothers themselves write, is it's kind of concerning. uh,
yeah.
to
Like, have
be
they
honest
never
with
been
you,
around somebody who smokes weed? Because I don't know about you, but that behavior made no sense to me. I'm like, I'm
I
not even.
know,
I
and
don't. I
it's
don't
like,
smoke by any means, but I've been to a party in my life. Like, do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
I
you know
know,
what it
and
smells like.
yeah, it smells bad.
Yeah,
It's
like you can. It's a kind of
it's
very
like
distinctive
skunk.
smell. It's a
It's like
distinctive
skunk.
smell.
Yeah, I mean it really is,
Yeah,
and it's just
yeah. No,
this is and this is part of the reason too, um like I wasn't really digging Joyce in season 4. Like usually Joyce is like I'm all about watching Joyce scenes, but like throughout season 4 I'm just like, this is not Joyce. I mean,
it didn't seem like her until they got to Russia. Do you know what I mean? Like it
yeah,
like when they were in
exactly.
California, it
Like
didn't seem like her. Yeah.
exactly, like when she's like just pressing all the buttons, that's definitely Joyce, but
Yes, that is her. 100%.
but I mean, just the thing with the weed,
Yeah,
um,
that made no sense.
not going to um, you know, check on 11, who she knows
Yeah.
is upset, something is going on. I mean, it
Yeah.
just
And
um
Murray outright says he knows what's up with Jonathan and Argyle, and she
yeah.
doesn't ask him what he's talking about.
Yeah, I
Like,
know. And
well, Will and Mike do that too. Like, Will literally comments, he's like, "What friends?" He comments several times, and Mike completely ignores him, and then throws a hissy fit that he doesn't know what's going on. I'm like, Will just told you what was going on, dude. Like all the characters in that first couple of episodes, they do this, and I'm like, why did you have them speak if they're just going to ignore them? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like no
I know,
sense.
and throughout the seasons, especially seasons 1 and 2, um, it's obvious like Joyce is all about Will, and like nothing else. Um, which, when you think about it, it's understandable, but I always get a sense of Joyce was already like that before Will got taken. Um, and this is also what makes me, kind of feel sad for Jonathan sometimes, is like it's like his mother, doesn't really seem to um, care about uh, you know, things that are going on with him and his life, you know? Do you ever get that feeling?
I don't get the sense she doesn't care, but like that conversation they have in season one where she apologizes to Jonathan and she's like, I haven't been there, and he's like, it's okay, mom. He's like, she's like, no, no, it's not. I'm so sorry. And like they hug at the police station where she's like, you're not like you act like you're alone, but you're not. Like they really drive that home that she knows that like she's kind of always a step behind with Jonathan, that they are not really in sync. And they talk about that in season one, and I understood in season two, like, that they were both really worried about Will, like, and that made sense, right? But that was something I found to be a bit odd, that I was kind of expecting a follow up on that in season three and four, because like both of them acknowledge that they're kind of out of sync with each other. That like Joyce is always kind of a step behind with Jonathan. He's aware of this. And to me, it kind of gave the vibe that they were probably, close and in sync before Will was born. But like after Will was born, he became the focus, either because they were trying to protect him from Lonnie, or just because he faced challenges that Jonathan didn't face, or Jonathan didn't let on, something like that. And so I was surprised we didn't get more follow up, because they head on acknowledge it in season one. And season two, I kind of made sense, but three and four, I was expecting a bit more follow up where Joyce would be, kind of making good on that promise and being more involved in Jonathan's life, and, that they would be kind of communicating more. And instead, what we got is they continue to not be in sync. She's a step behind with what's going on with them all the time. And something I didn't like about season four was that it brought back around this thing from season one where Jonathan, it appears he understands that Joyce is a step behind. So he takes advantage of that. Like he takes advantage of the fact that she's not quite clued in with what's going on with him. And like that just feels icky, Like this is someone who claims to love his family, who's apparently taking advantage of the fact that his mother is a step behind. And she's also not addressing this, even though she said that she would. So that never really made much sense to me, because they pointed out so distinctly in season one, they just never returned to it. Which I've always thought was a little odd.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, and it's like, season 4, to me, like, as it pertains specifically to Jonathan, is like, I consider this like his rebellion season in a way, because you look at, especially in season 1, like, you can tell, like, he is, you know, he helps, you know, his mom out with Will and everything else, and, helps, cook breakfast and has to make sure that Will's up and ready and stuff. And you can definitely tell, like, um, he's kind of the quote unquote man of the house, um, and, doesn't really strike me as, teenager that really gets to live the normal life of a teenager because, of their financial, status and all that. And, in season 1, like episode 1, I believe it was, yeah, it was episode 1, um, when, Joyce is freaking out because they can't find Will, and Jonathan's like, I had took an extra shift last night, and she's like, I told you, let me know when you do that, or you can't do that, when I'm working and stuff. And, he's like, yeah, I'm just trying to help us out and stuff. And, um, it seems like, in season 4, Jonathan's like, well, I don't have to do that stuff anymore, so I'm just gonna do, what I want to do. And also, you add on the depression because, it really seems to me like he did not want to move out there. I think he really wanted to stay. And if you think about it, he probably could have stayed in
But that's
Hawkins
the
if he
thing. Like
wanted
he could have
to.
stayed in Hawkins. So like that's what doesn't make sense to me because I'm like, well, if his whole thing is he didn't want to be there, he could have stayed. And his whole thing is like, well, that his family doesn't need him the way they used to, so he's kind of lost. I'm like, well, you could have stayed. Like, do you know what I mean? Like he has the right to stay in Hawkins if he wants to. So that's something that doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, you didn't want to go, you moved, you realized they didn't need you. So instead of moving back to Hawkins, you just stayed and to be miserable and do drugs. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we're missing a piece here, I think. You know?
Yeah, and I also too thought, originally that Jonathan was going to work for Surfer Boy Pizza, and maybe that was the
Yeah.
plan, and they realized, oh well, this is like, Steve and Robin from season 3, and we want to do
Yeah.
something different. But I mean, you still could have had him like work at the roller rink. I think that would have been pretty fun. Like have
Yeah.
him work at the roller rink and you know, or do something
Or
like
even
that. I don't know.
just something off camera. Do you know what I mean? Like in season one, we don't see what his job is. Just a
Yeah,
reference to a job. Do you know what I mean? Because,
yeah.
like, how is he paying for all this weed unless Argyle's giving it to him for free because they're buds? Like, you know what I mean? It's not like a cheap hobby. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so
I don't
yeah,
know. I mean, I
yeah,
just I definitely did not Joyce was definitely not high up on, the poll for me in season 4, especially, like in I was thinking episode 3, when, a really good scene would have been to see her, knock on Elle's door and ask her if she was okay, and, them have a nice, girl talk or whatever, and um like they definitely could have fit that in. I mean, that was the shortest
oh
episode
yeah,
this season.
100%,
And
100%.
it's like, in episode 9 when um we see, 11, excited to see Joyce and stuff, they, run and like hug each other and stuff. I'm like, and it's like, I mean, I get that not everything has to be shown on screen, but it's like we have not seen 11 and Joyce share a moment between the two of them at all this season. And now that we're at the end of the season, you want us to think that they're like have a normal mother-daughter relationship. I mean, Joyce didn't even get up to go um, ask if the girl was okay when she obviously knew that she was upset about something. You know,
Yeah,
like
I'm trying to remember. Did the who wrote the last episode? Do you remember?
the Duffer Brothers.
Okay, that's what I was wondering because I thought you were going to bring up episode 9 because the Joyce we see in that scene at the end looks so much more like the Joyce we've known for 3 seasons, right? Like the way
Yeah,
she interacts with
yeah,
the kids and the way they interact with her. And like you said, you pointed out to me that you can see Joyce and Elle talking in the background when the ash starts to fall, and it appears that they're talking about, Mike saying "I love you," and she seems like she knows what's going on. And so that looks more like the Joyce you would expect. And the same thing with Jonathan. Like we don't see Jonathan and Elle interact. And not only that, when they see each other after she's like they get her back from the lab, Jonathan doesn't hug her. He doesn't move. He doesn't do anything. When they arrive in the van in Hawkins, again, does nothing. Like, and this is supposed to be his adopted sister. Like, we don't see that at all. But then you get to the end of that episode, and they're all, he's standing next to Will. Like, they all seem like a happy family, right? So that's the weird thing too. It's like if we're supposed to believe that Joyce and Elle have a mother-daughter relationship, and Jonathan has a big brother relationship to Elle, if we're supposed to believe that they have the same kind of closeness to her that Will and Elle have to each other, they needed to have showed that. They really show it with Will and Elle. They really do. But then they don't show it with them, and it's like it was supposed to be
it's
implied,
yeah,
but
it's weird.
it's weird. You don't that's not something you imply.
And even
Like,
the 11 and Will embrace in episode 8, it's weird because I mean, yeah, we do see them share, some scenes on screen earlier on in the season, but the way he kind of is like apologizing and stuff and make sure she's okay implies that like, he did not like her very much in the first couple of episodes. And like now, that, this like happened to her or whatever, like he feels guilty or something, and that kind of makes me wonder, was this like an improv thing that Noah and Millie did? Because I can definitely see them doing that because I know they're very close in real life. Um, and that part just felt really, like really weird, um, like yeah, let them hug. I mean, because I don't think Will hates 11, but like, do we really have to see the additional dialogue here between these two? Like, I don't know. It's just weird. It was just weird. And then like some of the dialogue overall in season 4, the way they did some things was just out of the norm for them. And again, in episode 8, like it's kind of like towards the end. It's right before um we see the shot of the gang and Hawkins about to go into the grill house. Um, when Eleven's telling Mike, like, we need to get to Hawkins now, they're going to try to kill him. And Will goes, kill, who's going to try to do it? And it's like, who do you think? I mean,
Yeah, that was kind of weird. Yeah, I
I,
will. Yeah.
I understand, like, a dramatic thing, but just have them all look at each other with a knowing glance,
Yeah, they didn't need to put that in the dialogue. I do
But
agree
yeah,
with that.
so I wonder if that was again like improv and they were just, scrambling to get everything edited in time and they just
And
like,
that was the take
screw
that
it.
worked. Yeah.
Yeah. But again,
Yeah.
it takes so much out from it because, it also makes him look kind of, like he's not with it. And it's like,
Yeah, that's a little weird.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
who do you think
Who do
will
you think it is? Yeah.
I
And
mean, who else would it be?
who else would it be? Yeah. And I kind of I've seen people comment that I feel like some of the scenes between Elle and Will are more like Noah and Millie. And personally, I thought
Yeah,
they were very
yeah.
believable. Like I see both. I think that obviously infuses it the same way that Sadie and Millie's relationship infuses Max and Sadie. Um, or oh my god, Max and 11. Um, but I think because we had more build up on that, like it builds up throughout season 3. So you know what I mean? I think there was more build up there, and I personally did buy Ellen Will because I thought that their scenes were genuine. But I understand where people are coming from in that like um you know what I mean? We see them so briefly, and then like because Mike kind of shows up and all that throws a wrench into things, we don't really get that follow up. Like Will promises to help with Fixer Diorama, but then he gets distracted by Mike and his
Yeah.
nonsense and doesn't wind up helping her. Also, he freezes up every time the bullying happens, and we don't really get anything more in that. Like I think it's supposed to be implied that he's freezing, like it's a as they say, you have like fight, flight, um, freeze or fawn, right? That he's freezing there. But I wish we'd gotten more, or even just a scene of him just like maybe panicking a little bit in his room, just something to give context that like he wants to help, but he's struggling like physiologically with it. Like we don't. He just kind of stands there, and you know what I mean. Instead of implying this, I wish they just shown us. They'd shown us something to give context to how these characters were feeling. They'd shown and given us dialogue rather than trying to imply everything. Like, I mean, that dinner party scene is so cringe. I mean, at one point, Jonathan is so high he mistakes olive oil for white wine when he's not old enough to drink. And Joyce is like, "What's wrong with you?" And Murray's like, "I know." And she doesn't follow that up. She doesn't follow up with Elle. She doesn't follow up with Jonathan. And also, Will is sitting right there, rolling his eyes, pouring out this crap the entire time to Mike, to Joyce, to everybody. And everybody just acts like Will isn't there. And I'm like, then what was the point of having him in the scene? Like, if you're gonna have him comment on it, do something about it, like
I know. And
oh
and then like in episode 3 when Jonathan and Mike and Will that this is the next day after everything, the roller rink, and Mike is obviously kind of hurt that 11 has not come down for breakfast yet, and he's trying to get his relationship back on track, and Will just after Mike leaves, it's like all depressed and moping and stuff, and it's like, dude, I mean, what did you think? What did you think he was gonna do? Which I mean, I guess that's not completely out of left field, especially considering that we know
No,
that Will has a crush on Mike,
I
but
think I
I
think they all
mean,
had different expectations of the trip. Like I think
yeah, yeah,
Mike gave them the wrong impression. Like, and I think he kept fumbling the bag. Like he should have clocked that Will was upset. He should have clocked that 11 was upset. Instead, he got off that plane, walked into the situation like everything was fine when it was clearly not fine. So I don't blame Will for that. I think if you were excited to see your best friend that you have a crush on, and as Elle, you're excited to see your boyfriend, and he's acting like an oblivious tool the entire time, I would also be moping. I would also be mad because it's like his whole line to both Elle and Will is like, "Well, you didn't tell me she was struggling. Why didn't you tell me?" And like as Robin pointed out when we had her on the podcast, like this is not new information considering what Will and Elle and their family have been through. It should not be shocking to you that they're having a hard time. Like that's not new information. So like if he actually bought that crap, he's an idiot. But we know Mike's not
yeah.
dumb. So like her dad died. They moved to a different state, new school. She's never been in school before. Like it should not be shocking to you they're having a hard time. Like
I know, and too, like I mean, even though like we the audience know, like a little bit later on that Owens is, he basically set them up out there. But I mean, I guess it's kind of implied that Mike um knows that as well, or even he doesn't know that part of it, like he I'm sure knows like there's a reason that they moved out to California, and it's mostly for Eleven's safety. um and it's just like, well, if you know that they really didn't have a choice to move out here, Mike, then you know that it's not like they're all happy, to have left
yeah,
their home and
yeah.
their friends behind. It's not like, you know, you're all out here on a vacation to Disneyland or anything. Like
No,
they
no,
did
not
not
here
have
to
a
soak
choice
up
to
the
come
sun.
here, you
No.
know. And when you add in like Hopper wasn't there anymore to look after things, and so like they they did not have a choice to move out there. Even though I do think that um you know Joyce probably would have moved regardless. I think just maybe a little bit, closer than
Yeah, yeah.
California. But again, they did not have a choice in the matter. you know.
No, they didn't have a choice, and Mike knew that. So, like, that's the thing, right? Like, and it's one thing, you know what I mean? It's one thing if this had been like Thanksgiving or Christmas we were seeing. I could buy that Mike thought things were okay if they've been telling him all this great stuff and they hadn't been there that long. I could kind of buy that, you know? You want what's best. You want to think the best. But at this point, they've been there about 8 months, and you know what I mean? Like, apparently they were doing okay at Thanksgiving. We don't know how everybody was doing at Christmas. Apparently, well enough to fool them. But like at this point, like he shows up to the airport. Jonathan like looks like a total mess. Argyle's being freaking weird. Um, like
Let me look at that tag, bro.
right, like he's being, and he's like heard a lot about your sister, and he's like, what the hell? So like you can tell the situation is off. Like it was clear things were off from the beginning. And I'm sorry, but if someone's been somewhere 8 months, like do you know what I mean? Like, and they're telling you everything is wonderful and great when you know what they've been through, they didn't have a choice. It should not be. You should know outright that they are probably struggling at least a little bit. So the fact that he also, it's not like they're rich. Do you know what I mean? Like he's acting like they're like his family, but they're not, and he knows that. So like yeah, it's just like I don't know. It's like he threw everything he knew about their family out the window, considering he's known Will since he was like 5. And was like shocked that like, oh my god, you mean everything you've been telling me is a lie? It's like, well, no crap, Mike. Like, did you actually think they were doing well out there? Like,
Yeah,
that's not new information.
and this is a personality trait that I think that Mike and Nancy both share. And you know I love Nancy. Like Nancy is
Yeah. Oh,
my
100%.
second favorite.
100%.
She's my second favorite character behind 11. But when Nancy gets focused on something, she completely loses her entire peripheral vision for anything else around her, including anyone else, around her. Like she's all about, getting the job done or whatever. And Mike's kind of the same way.
Yeah. Wheeler family trait. They're both oblivious and they get tunnel vision. And then they're shocked and upset and mad when, as a result, they're not aware of what's going on or like things are not going well in their relationships. And it's like, you love them. I love those characters. And Nancy is one of my favorites too. But I agree with you that it's like, well, if you're going to get tunnel vision and you're going to be oblivious, you can't exactly be shocked or surprised when you've missed a whole bunch of stuff and things aren't going well, but they are. And it's like, for Nancy, I feel like
Yeah.
it's more of a character flaw that I think they flushed out well enough that we understand. Whereas for Mike, I feel like they haven't flushed it out well enough. For Mike, it comes across as more incongruent or not out of character, but just like, you can't be that dumb, Mike. Whereas for Nancy, it feels to me like it's more of a character flaw they've actually spent time developing.
Yeah, yeah. And they've done I think they've done, a good job with it. But it's like I think in episode 5, season 4, when they're, you know, trying to plot out like the coordinates and stuff, or like episode 6, I don't know, it's when Jonathan and Mike are talking over the map and stuff of like, getting to Nevada. No, it is episode 5 because they're talking about the specific coordinates of the Nina project, and wondering like if they're right or wrong. And Mike acts so much like Nancy in that scene. Is not even funny, because you know how Nancy
Yeah.
is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, I'm not wrong. This is right because I said it so. Okay, like
Yo.
don't question me, man.
Yeah, he totally did that. I do say I think that the actors do a good job of really making you believe that they're siblings. Like they really do seem like, people who share traits in common and grew up in the same household. Like I think they do a really good job of that. And I will say something that the show does deserve praise for is that the siblings in the show actually feel like siblings, you know? Like
Yeah, yeah,
you
exactly.
they resemble each other, they share traits, they share attributes, the way they interact with each other feels natural. You can tell that they've given the actors a lot of um like ability to kind of play around with it and adapt it how they think they would interact with that character, rather than making it a bit more forced, which I really like. Particularly, I really like Lucas and Erica, their interactions, especially in season 4. You really feel that way. But Will and Jonathan, Nancy and Mike, they really feel like siblings. And I also wonder too that, like you see that Jonathan's annoyed with Mike throughout season 4. And yeah, a large part of that is he realizes how he's treating Will. But I also think part of it is that's a trait of Nancy's that Jonathan really doesn't like, that really drives him
Yeah,
nuts.
because that was her all of season 3 with him.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly like that.
Yep.
With you know, the rats and
Yep.
everything like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's exactly the way Nancy treated him like all of season 3.
Yeah. And since their relationship isn't doing well, like we find out in season 4 that like stuff we thought had been resolved off screen post season 3 hadn't been, and those issues are still kind of there for them. I wouldn't say they're festering, but they're still there. They're still a problem. They haven't really been dealt with. Now he's riding around in a van with a mini Nancy that is also not treating his brother well. And so he's just annoyed the whole time. And I don't blame him for being annoyed with Mike. Like, have you seen that meme where like it's like Hopper being like, "It's that son of a bitch, Mike," and it's like Jonathan all of season 4. like the Mike Wheeler hate club is having a meeting because like he becomes like the new Hopper. Like he is to Mike in that season what like Hopper is to him in season 3. He's like, you son of a bitch, like you're driving me nuts, stop doing this. Like
I know.
it did make me laugh, I have to say. But yeah, I think yeah, it's
And
just
then it did to that point, like in
mm,
episode 8, when Michael and Will, mostly Mike, notice 11, standing up after she's, you know, confronting the helicopter, and they're like, oh, there she is, you gotta go. And Jonathan's just like, thinking, rationally about, this helicopter, and he could probably see that, there's, the guy that's in there is holding, a gun and stuff, and it's probably like, we need to think about this safely, so that we're not killed. And he's like, like he's trying to get there as fast as he can. But like Pizza Man's, not really built for the desert, and they're just like, go, go, go. And he's like, I'm trying, and because at
yeah,
that point, like they've ridden hours at that point, and
he's doing
that's
his
all that they care
best.
about, and it's not that he doesn't care either, but they're just like, okay, go, go, and
They're not built for speed. It's a pizza van.
I
Like
know.
it's not a Ferrari, and they're acting like he's not trying. He's like, I'm
Yeah,
trying here,
because I
guys.
think I
Like,
think I think too. He even said like, where is she? Because like there's dust and stuff coming up like on the windshield, like he can't
yeah, he can't see.
barely
They can, but
see.
he can't.
Yeah, and he's like, where? And they're like, there, over there. It's just,
Also,
you know,
over there in the middle of a desert is not a helpful direction.
and
Like,
yeah,
he
and
said
when
to your
we,
left, to your right.
yeah,
Like,
and
give him a direction.
she looks like a little speck at that point because they're so
Yes.
far away.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what we're trying to say here is that the writing could have been better in season 4. And
Yeah, and it's like
Jonathan did his
the
best.
story, nothing really, to complain about in terms of the story,
No, the
but it's
story. It's more the characterization.
the little things,
Yeah. Yeah.
the smaller, you know,
Mm-hmm.
portions.
Yeah.
Well, this was a fun season 5 behind the scenes
Yeah. So
content
fun.
video.
Getting getting back to that.
I know, and it's like, um, these are things that like still, haunt me
Mm-hmm.
about season 4. Every time I rewatch it,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I just, some things I can't, really shake, and that was one of them. And I think, Jazz, if we had more time, we could definitely move over to the Russian plot because it was the same
Yeah,
too. I mean,
we're not gonna get into that tonight, but yeah, we could definitely cover that. We could definitely cover that.
yeah, I mean that, again, not a bad plot. Okay, I will say that I
Yeah.
loved the cinematography of that plot, and the
Mm-hmm.
first, few episodes that we see of that plot, I was very invested in because I again love the cinematography. I love the historical nature behind it, and I loved, seeing that view of Kamchatka, and how there's like, during the middle of the day, it's like a, ghost town. And I think, just, shines light on the Soviet Union, um, at the time, and then you contrast it to in America, like Hawkins and stuff. Loved the vibes with that, and I also loved this version of the Russians themselves. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I just felt like, same with like the California plot, they definitely could have done a lot more with that plot, with the Russian plot, than they did, because it felt like that was probably the longest plot because like nothing really happened, you know? And
Yeah, they definitely could have sped stuff out. There's stuff about that plot I really liked. Like, I really like seeing the interactions between like Hopper and Dimitri. I like the rescue, but there's definitely stuff I will agree. Like, I really enjoyed that plot, but I do agree there's stuff that they could have used montages for and sped up to get to that point, and they still could have reached the same point, but they could have sped it up a little bit. Um, and yeah, they definitely could have sped it up a bit. I agree with that.
And I think probably just touch on this just briefly, if I may. I think probably the biggest one, well, not the biggest, but one of the certainly one of the biggest gaffes that I've noticed with that plot, in terms of like the dialogue, um, is when Hopper is, talking to Dimitri about, his time in Vietnam War. And, in season two, we're kind of meant to believe that Hopper was a foot soldier because he, talks about PTSD and all that. Um, and then here, I was in the chemical corps, and he, when he talks is like he did not experience, you know, actual combat. He was just stuck in the chemical corps, which I mean, he could have, gotten out of that and,
I kind of assume it was
you know,
both though. Like they
yeah,
said they were
and
mixing stuff up that I kind of got the impression that it was both.
yeah, but when he says, I was 18 and got shipped off, like, um, when he was 18, which would have been, um, in like 1960, 1961, the U.S. wasn't involved in Vietnam. Like the actual Vietnam War, in terms of U.S. involvement with like ground troops and with Agent Orange stuff, didn't happen until 1965. So
I mean, I guess we're supposed to
unless,
believe his age is a bit off from the character. I guess. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah, but if the first Shadow play is to be canon,
it's not
he's
canon.
he's 18 in 1959. Uh,
Yeah, no, no.
so
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not canon. The only thing I say is I feel like maybe they're supposed to be a few years off from their characters, just like the ages of the actors and stuff, because or just I mean, obviously the first shot is not canon. Um, but the fact that there's that kind of historical inaccuracy in the play though was really weird. Because I just remember seeing something where I guess like Sean Ashton, who played Bob, is like several years off from how old his character is supposed to be. So all I can think
mhm.
of is it's just supposed to be it's not so much a plot hole was that it's just they're supposed to be a few years off from their character and they haven't quite established that. But it is weird they'd have an historical inaccuracy like that in the play because I feel like in the show it's a bit more you have a bit more leniency, it's a bit more, it's a bit fuzzier. Um whereas for them
Mhm.
to say that in the play, it's like, well, I mean, it's not like you said, it's not like when the US entered the Vietnam War is and when that stuff occurred, it's not like that's a secret. Like we know what the dates were.
Yeah, and when he, explains about like, what happened to um like the kids and stuff that were, born out of that because, of his exposure, which I mean, I'm not a scientist and I've I've never really thought about looking this up to be honest with you. Um, but
I
like
mean,
I
I
would
wouldn't
understand like
recommend it. I mean,
I
like,
know. I know,
I
but I
wouldn't
just
recommend looking it up.
like what the part about it I don't really fully understand is like, well, he's like he says that, that's how Sarah um, got cancer was, for because of that. But I'm like, how can it, automatically transfer to her DNA without anything happening to you because you got direct exposure, but
I actually
nothing
do
happened
think
to
he's right
you.
about that though. Because that's like you see other things with like to me it's similar to about all like the atomic bomb testing they did.
Hmm.
How like people were exposed, they wound up with cancer, and then their children, da 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 da. I take your point that like from his exposure, but like he doesn't say he wasn't affected. Like my kind of implication there was that he was affected in some way, but not to the extent that Sarah was. That like and he said half his unit was killed in action, so we don't know if they were like shot in action or if like the exposure took them out. Like the level of exposure can affect you differently. So my kind of understanding there was that like it affected him and his unit, but it affected when it passed on to their kids. the impact of what they were exposed to affected them more, or in different ways. Like it was kind of like a delayed reaction. And again, like I'm also not a scientist, but just from other things I've seen where there is an exposure that can happen where one person is fine and the next person isn't, or there's a much delayed reaction where years later you wind up having something. Um, so that was kind of my interpretation of what he was saying there.
Yeah. I
Like
mean,
I
I
find
don't.
that more believable because the way chemical gases or exposure works, it's not uniform, you know?
Yeah. But like his follow up to that about them like being born with broken like the spines and all that. Like from a writing standpoint, I always kind of like have wondered what they were where they were going towards. They I don't know. What do you think about that?
Like I don't know what you mean. What do you mean what they were going towards? Like
Like the point they were trying to make there, like the writers, saying like explaining, the way he kind of says it and describes it is kind of like what happens to Vecna's victims, broken
oh no, I didn't take it
limbs
that way at
and
all.
all
I
that.
just took it as no, I just took it as this was passed on to them until they were born with like birth defects that were incredibly difficult to deal with and they died. That's I don't think they were trying to make an illusion there. I think he was just saying the war followed us and we accidentally, without realizing it, passed us on to our kids and it destroyed them. Like they were really, things were happening to them that shouldn't be happening. The government claimed it was safe, but we realized it wasn't. That I don't think there's an illusion there. I think it's just those are birth defects you can be born with. I also will just say for context, I have a different perspective on this because I was born early, and most of the kids on my ward did not survive. So that kind of thing is, I mean, it's not as common as it used to be, but at one point was very common if you've been exposed to something, if you're born early. That stuff was once very common up until quite recently. So I don't think there's an illusion there. I think it's just that was the impact of the exposure.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And that's our show. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Our theme music is provided by Neon Knights, and our sound editing is provided by Ashton Cooper. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Please join us next time, same dial, same time.
Over and out.